Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 96. I want to introduce you again to a really interesting, innovative tech entrepreneur. Murray Simser is his name, and he's got an organization called Citizn. He just recently sent out an investor package, and it's interesting because it's evolved, metamorphosed. I don't know what the right term is, into something that's different than what I had initially understood his concept to be. And he explains to us that that's normal in the tech business, and it's the right strategy. And so I thought it'd be great to check in with Murray and find out what Citizn has evolved or metamorphosed into. Murray Simser, welcome to the show.
Morning, Brian. How are you?
Very well. It's evening at 6 o'clock. Anyway, thank you for joining again. I really appreciate it. Murray, tell us about Citizn, where it was and where it's going to, and why the strategy of sort of this stepwise evolution.
First off, thanks for having me on the show this evening, Brian. I mean, I'm delighted to be here. And I'm always delighted to come back on your show. I've been on it a few times, and it's well received, and loads of people listen in. So hi, everybody. The technology that we've developed since the internet arrived reduced the barriers to entry into the corporate world in such a way that copying technology became the norm after the internet. So if you thought about building a business before the internet in the 80s, it's quite expensive. You had to have an office, you had to have your own computer systems, you had to have your own data centers. Today, all of that's gone. You can literally light up a company and make a Twitter overnight. It's that easy. And so one of the strategies that tech entrepreneurs have used over the years, especially since then, and the older generation of entrepreneurs that have learned their bloody lesson the hard way, is to not tell people what you're doing and hide it in plain sight. And so what that means is you build these layer cakes. You start by building the first piece of underlying technology, and you peddle that. We called that Citizn, as you'll recall. Okay, that was the sort of very beginning of this. We said it was a social network that was
I thought it was going to be sort of like a Facebook for democracy.
That's what we called it 4 years ago when we started this thing, because if people were going to copy us and they were going to try to understand what you're doing, they'd copy the wrong thing. And I find that to be a delightful thing, watching people bend themselves into pretzels trying to copy what you're doing. It also allows a corporation to go through a period of evolution, because people that join a startup, not everybody, and I would almost argue about 3/4 of the people that join startups aren't prepared for the environment that they're in. And so as a consequence, they leave. And that causes a potential threat base to the corporation as well. It's a vector that is very much better informed than your sort of external competitors that would exist out there. And so layer cake, starting with Citizn, then we layered on Democracy GPT, you'll remember. So this was the chatbot to access the social network's data. And then most recently, what you received in that package that I sent out to the accredited investors across Toronto was, that are on our list, was the new package that is Humanity's OS, the operating system for human decision-making. And this is what we've been building.
Hold it. The operating system for human decision-making?
Correct.
I thought that was the brain.
If you think about the world we live in and the world you and I grew up in, they're very different things. Decision-making in the historic world was very much where you were located and who you knew. Because if you had access to, say, the centers of power in, say, Mississauga, where you are, or in federal politics in Ottawa or Toronto, there were gatekeepers that kept that up. But in the modern world, that's not the case. Decision-making in the modern world, particularly in the highly educated West, where almost everybody is now a millionaire. I mean, think about it. If you're a homeowner, you're a millionaire. I mean, your asset base starts at that level. There's a much greater expectation of participation in decision-making. And so the whole game behind everything we've built since the very beginning was to create the digital last mile that would tie all human beings together in a large group, meaning all 8 billion humans, so that they can make the decisions that affect them. And the first use case of that, the first use case that we sort of went out with and beta tested 4 times was Citizn, because everybody understands that democracy is a decision thing. You got to choose your politicians, you got to choose your policies. And so as a consequence, we used that democracy GPT and the Citizen platforms, the early layered cakes, to do what I call the prototyping and the proof of concepts. And if anybody copied us, they made a mistake. So in the end, we were able to build this over a very long period of time, 5 years, and now we're ready to go live with this operating system for humanity that allows every single person on Earth to participate in all the decisions that materially affect them, not just politics.
I had an interesting conversation with chief economist from Capital Economics on Friday, who was talking. He's from the UK. He was talking about the last UK election, and he said, "I've always been a supporter of referendum and involving people in decision making." He said that one of the things they learned is that there are things that shouldn't go to the people, like Brexit, that frankly, only educated people, informed people that really understood the issues, the elected representatives, should be making decisions, like the separation of the UK from the European community, and that too often people that think that the public should make decisions are going to end up with bad decisions because of populism and quick decisions that are wrong rather than long-term decisions that have to be well thought through. How do you respond to something like that when you're talking about having all humanity involved in decision making?
Well, the answer is it's entirely correct. The simple fact of the matter is, let's take two scenarios. I walk out into the middle of the street, I hand somebody an 800-page budget document, and I ask them their opinion about it. Do you consider that to be informed? The answer is no. This is the problem we have today, is that we are not able to bring together the people that should be making those types of decisions when it's appropriate for them to make it. And so what we do instead is we bend ourselves into pretzels trying to find enough people to answer questions about things that they know nothing about. 1,500 people in a poll, for instance, or some odd way of trying to capture the public sentiment, like looking at public sentiment analysis, meaning taking huge amounts of public data and saying, what's the general feeling on Twitter? Okay. This is trying to do science, but being an alchemist, okay, not a chemist. And so what we want to do is bring decision-making into the scientific world, where we know ahead of time who's going to answer, we know what they know, we know they're capable of answering it, and most importantly, we're credibly able to express that they have given their informed consent to a certain opinion. That's dramatically different than the weirdo world we live in today, and frankly, weird doesn't begin to describe it. The symptom of all that weirdness is best expressed through the nature of our politics today, okay? I mean, you yourself ran for mayor of Mississauga and experienced it. Your family is historically political, and you know the vagaries of that game. It's a ridiculous popularity contest, and these popularity contests are to run some of the richest and most powerful states on earth. I just don't think it's right to allow those kinds of serious decisions to be made by the nonsense that exists out there today. And so I built the thing to fix it.
I thought Citizen was all about democracy, and what you're now arguing is not democracy. You're arguing about only informed people get to make decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Only informed people get to make decisions. That sounds elitist, right? But at the end of the day, remember where I'm from. I'm from the working class poor, okay? Good people, solid, sound people. And I know these people, okay? And these citizens can make good decisions. They don't need to have a bloody advanced finance degree to be able to participate in society. What they need is for people to be honest with them for a change and give them the real information they need to make decisions. You don't believe me? Let's test the theory. Does a jury system make a good decision? In fact, the jury system in the West was one of the greatest inventions of humanity because it right-sized punishment, okay? And it took it out of the vagaries of the king's mad at me or this sort of business. The common law allowed us to make good decisions. Now, a jury's made up of fancy people like you and regular people like my family and me. And so at the end of the day, those people make good decisions, but you have to ask why. The answer is simple. They are given good information. They trust the process. Somebody is moderating that. And what we've done is digitize that whole concept and made it manifest in something called Decision OS, Decision GPT, whatever words you want to use to describe it. But it has unlimited applications for humanity. The first application of it is Citizen, because democracy is obviously today's nexus where decisions affect your daily life. Increased taxes, crime, all the stuff that everybody's now fighting over in these great societies. If we don't do something about that sooner or later, these wonderful, gorgeous societies we live in are going to fall apart. I'm starting with democracy, but it's not the end. And regular people who could become oppression of the masses won't, because the technology disallows it and the organized structure of Citizen disallows it.
Well, we're going to have to take a break for some messages and come back and ask you about what exactly does your, is it an app? Is it a website? What is it? Whatever it is, what it does. We got to understand what it actually does. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes with Murray Simser talking about Citizen and democracy and really informed people. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Murray Simser. He is the founder and CEO of an organization, a company called Citizn. Murray, if people want to check you out, follow you, what's the best way to do that? Is it website or Twitter or what?
Obviously, it's pretty simple to type in this word and you'll get lots of stuff in Google, but there's also the website, citizen.world, so no E, as you can see.
Citizn.
Citizn, right there. And obviously you'll find stuff, but I think more importantly, the 4 years and 5 years of work that we've done and the 4 prototypes and all the beta tests that we've accomplished culminates in sort of this year, September to May. This is our go-to-market time. And so the universities around the country and the colleges and the great institutes, research institutes around the country should expect a call from us, because we're going to be traveling to all of those institutions to talk to the young in this country, to share what this platform is and how it's going to change their lives and make it better. So you're going to hear a lot about us starting in September. You're going to hear a lot of noise online, but you can also go and proactively look at it. And if you're interested in talking to us about the company and getting involved somehow in the corporation, you can always just reach out to me. I'm easy to find. Just go online and send me a direct message or private message.
And this app, is it downloadable if people want?
Yeah. So you asked the question just before the break, what is this? Okay. So remember that a lot of people talk about there's an app for that, there's an app for that, okay? Like that in 2000, when the iPhones and the smartphones came out, apps became sort of the platform of par excellence that we were using. But what I think people don't realize about, these sort of great devices now is that they're actually not, they're not apps anymore. Okay, they're just programs that are running on your computer, but they are interfaces to a very much larger cloud that exists in the world. And that cloud is doing all the processing. Okay, so in our case, because we are a big data, machine learning, and ultimately, in a simple way to describe it, an AI company that expresses that data, the mechanism we use to capture the data and the mechanism we use to express the data is the same. It's an app on a telephone or a browser on your computer at home. So I like to think of it as a larger thing than an app. An app is just a means to connect people, the instrument that puts Brian Crombie into the decision matrix that we're building. So yeah, you have to download it, you have to sign up, and that will become available after the school year starts, because we're really targeting the universities, at least in the short term.
Okay, and then what you described is that it's different than ChatGPT or large language models. Tell me how you're different.
Yeah, so large language models, these are the most wonderful pieces of technology, because for the first time in all of human history, they have synthesized the sum total of human knowledge, okay? And you are now able to interrogate that human knowledge. But the one thing that is so important about it is how those great systems are trained. Training is the key with these things, okay? You need to think of an AI. We personify them, regrettably, so let's continue that. And let's give them a bit of a human veneer. they need to be trained. Okay. And AI is only as good, and a large language model more particularly, is only as good as the data into which the data it has access to. So if you play with different large language models, Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, all of these different AIs have a different level of knowledge and productivity, and it's usually related to the amount of data that they've been trained on. Okay. Now, that begs the question, do those large language models get trained on public data or private data? And the answer is it's full public. Okay, meaning the deepest, darkest secrets in Brian Crombie's head or Murray Simser's head never get shared in a large language model, and never can you ask the question, what does Brian Crombie specifically think on a particular thing? Whatever the thing is, it could be democracy, it could be how our societies run, it could be do we have an opinion about a particular social thing, it could be something about like all of the things that humans do. That's never available to the LLMs, ever. Okay. And so even though LLMs seem like they can divine the future, we used to think that about Google search, when Google search would fill out our deepest, darkest thoughts when we were doing searches. Okay. There's nothing magic about this. LLMs don't have access to personal and private data, full stop. That means corporate data, individual data, banking data, finance data, all that stuff, but in particular, the human thinking is not accessible. Citizen,
okay, hold it before you go there.
Decision OS actually brings every human being into that decision process directly. And so by taking the large language model concept and adding an actual 8 billion human being connectivity to it, you get something that is brilliance for knowledge, but also wisdom of the humans. And so Democracy GPT's parent company, if you want to think about it like that, Humanity GPT, which is what we're calling it, is the first time that you've actually created not just knowledge in an AI, but wisdom.
Okay, let me ask you a few questions to try to understand this better. I'm going to break it down in pieces. So
sure.
You mentioned a couple of different large language models, different artificial intelligence, I don't even know what you call it, vehicles or apps.
Sure.
And you said that they're trained differently. I thought each one of them had all the same public information put into them. So are you saying that each one of these different artificial intelligence, what do you call them, vehicles, have different databases?
Well, not only do they have different databases, they have different algorithms that determine how they answer things, okay? They are as unique, large language models are as unique and as varied. If you go 50 years ahead of time, there will be as many of those as there are quote unquote apps today. In other words, a large language model, since we've personified and made them into humans, okay? The AI is as unique as every individual. And so, you and I are not the same thing. Yet we were.
So if you ask the same question,
schools, we were educated in the same ways, but we're not the same. We were trained, you and I, on different data. This is identical to all the large language models. They are trained on whatever data they can get their hands on, and there's no place to go get that. You literally have to go out on the internet and scrape and look for and aggregate and buy data to use to train that model. Every one of them is different. And the longer they go, the more different they become.
That's interesting. So if you ask two different AI, what do I call them? Vehicles?
Call them a platform.
Platform. If I ask the same question to two AI platforms, I would get two very different answers.
Well, if you want a very precise answer, yes. And the degree to which they're different can be they could be just a little bit different, or they could be a whole lot different. I can't explain this enough. AIs are just like humans. You take two kids in the same school, they come out completely differently, and they've had all the same information. But the reason they're different is because they also have other information, families, friends, neighborhoods, all that different stuff influences us and makes us who we are.
That's fascinating. Okay, so second question then. What you had said is that it only has public information, but and it can't sort of discern what we're thinking. but I've had numerous different pitches from people. In fact, one of your good friends in Ottawa is trying to get information from social media. So is going and taking a look at what people are saying on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, et cetera, and using that to discern what people are thinking about topics and effectively saying this is people's private information that they're expressing publicly through social media. Isn't that a way of understanding what people are thinking publicly?
Of course it is. And in fact, I don't know which of the two friends, if it's Aaron or if it's Nick, but both of those companies, for instance, Ask Polly, which is a terrific AI, by the way, in politics in Canada, fabulous. That's a good example of training on publicly available data. So, Aaron Kelly's company, which is Ask Paul, and you should have her on the show, by the way. She's unbelievable. And in her company goes out and gets all of these data sets that are sort of publicly available. And through their unique algorithms, they interrogate that data to determine and divine the sort of political reality. But they also do it for other things like commercial issues or product development or a variety of other things that are out there. That public data can be used to define things. But as you know, public data has its limits. And so the future of sort of human decision-making, or the semantic expression of what large groups of people think, which I think is a better way to describe it technically, is best served by aggregating even more information. And I mean orders of magnitude more information than is currently available today in large language models. The private data sphere is actually quite a bit larger than the public data sphere. So if you think about the public data sphere being sort of the size of that picture behind me here, okay? The private data sphere is not a two-dimensional canvas. The private data sphere is this three-dimensional room that I'm in, okay, that contains all of the information not currently available in those public LLMs. We're capturing that.
How do you capture that? Is that,
the data so precise and reliable, people are going to lose it.
So much of what people are concerned about is giving over their private information. How are you going to get people to voluntarily provide private information or access to private information?
So I think that's the most important question. Okay, the data is going to be there. The question is who owns it. And I think that what you're going to find is most of the other people out there today in the sort of sphere, they are using public data that is also not theirs. Now, this is really important because you're going to hear a lot about copyright claims and people stealing information. You know, this business of the news companies saying that Google stole from them because they would post a news link to their, and it would go to the, say, Toronto Star or this sort of thing. That's just the beginning of copyright claim in the digital sphere. AI, most LLMs today were trained using publicly available data that was scraped. Scraping means you go out on the internet, you look at a web page and you capture all the text or all the information you can get off of it. You send that back to a database, you organize it, and then you spit out answers based on the algorithms that you put in. You can go to Gemini or Copilot or whatever and get that. I believe that those companies are going to face so many lawsuits over this that it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. The whole purpose of Citizen, and the reason I use Citizen as the first use case for the technology, is that in the end, this copyright and ownership question is central to the future of AI. If you don't own that data, good luck trying to defend the revenue that you've created using it. And so Citizen's purpose was to say, we know we have to have this system to make good decisions in a digital cyber world. And I'm thinking 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Forget today, okay? It's not important today. It's important in 30 years to get this right, just like it was important in the 90s to get the internet right today, okay? What we need is for the AI models to have unimpeachable ownership of the data so that they don't have any fundamental threats to it. And the only way you can get people to give up that data and say, hand over their deepest, darkest political secrets is to make sure I don't own, control, or even have access to that data. They do. And so Citizen's purpose is to make sure that that revenue that's generated, the power that comes out of this decision platform, is not in the hands of some super nerd like me, but rather in the hands of the people themselves, and that it benefits the societies in which they operate. This is the key. So what we're saying is, if you join Citizen, you're not just joining some new Facebook or some new tech company or some new AI that's owned by some, faceless committee that's a bunch of rich investors, although that will exist because they're funding it. Those people are investing in this company to turn it over to the people so that they own and control this huge piece of social infrastructure. And only once they own it and control it will they be confident enough to give away those really important pieces of human decision making that they have in their minds. And we think we earned that by structuring the company thus.
What personal information am I giving over to Citizen if I join it and then own a piece of it?
Yes. Well, so first off, it's all the people in Canada, the United States will own their own citizens. So the information you're giving up in Citizen, which is just the first use case of Humanity GPT, is your opinions about politics. Now, what could be more personal? If you really think about it, most people don't talk about their political opinion. You and I do. Everybody knows what we think because we're out there doing it. But 80% of people, 85% of people are generally uncomfortable speaking about politics. You know, the old saying, politics and prayers, it's a bit awkward at a party kind of thing. So nobody wants this to be out in the public. And in fact, although we live in Canada and it doesn't really matter what our political opinions are, it's not consequential to our lives. If you lived in other countries, that would not be the case. This data is so private and personal that people are often afraid to even give it up in other countries, okay? Most countries, people would be afraid to give it up. Even in the United States, they'd be afraid to give it up. And so this data, your opinion about a particular policy, your opinion about a party, your opinion, these are pieces of data that could sometimes affect people's opinion of you. And when the data you give up can affect people's opinions of you, this data needs to be unimpeachably protected from abuse. And so we've built the company so that the people themselves own it all the way up, okay? Humanity, GPT, and everything below it. So that the people have confidence in the system and they're able to actually opine in a way that's comforting and beneficial, not just for their feelings, but they're also their pocketbook.
Actually fascinating. Interesting platform that you're launching. I wonder how it's going to change democracy, how it's going to change the world. I'm going to take a break for some messages and come back, and I'm going to ask Murray a couple of questions about this. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Murray Simser, the founder and CEO of Citizn. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Murray Simser. He is the founder and CEO of an organization, a platform, a company called Citizn, and he's trying to create a platform, an artificial intelligence platform that will improve, change democracy, and provide public decision making. I guess is the way to describe it. Murray, let's just take a step back for a second and tell everyone a little bit about your background. You've got quite a political and technology background. Is that not the case?
It is. And neither of those things were planned for me. And I'm sort of poor boy made good kind of thing. I went to Ottawa U, and in our nation's capital, for those listening that aren't in Canada, and studied economics. I wanted to be a banker. I was the guy wearing ties and stuff while I was in university. Well, I then discovered politics and became the worst student in the history of the planet, okay? Because I was basically living on Parliament Hill, working for Jacques Chrétien, working for a bunch of MPs, and working for the Liberal Party back then. I'm apolitical, just for the record. But I then got so sick of politics at the end of that I got my first job in Toronto, and that company got bought by a mid-stage buyout firm in Menlo Park, California, which is San Francisco, and Silicon Valley, and that changed everything. From that point forward, I was this junior kid down in Silicon Valley, like eyes wide open, loving this world, and I found my calling, which is nerding out with tech, which I had been doing while I was at school, sort of self-teaching myself coding and all the rest of it. But in the end, for the next 15 years, I lived in the United States. I didn't come back to Canada until 2012. So I grew up professionally in America, and America made me who I am. And I love the United States of America. I think it's the greatest country that's ever existed. But that gave me the impetus to come home to Toronto because my first love is Toronto. So, I'm Captain Canada. I had the stickers on the car and everything while I was in the US. And I wanted to come home. And I finally had the opportunity to come home in 2012. And I thought, well, I'm going back to Toronto. Toronto is now this great incubation environment for tech. Why not do it here instead of before, where when I founded a company, we stayed in California to found that rather than come back to Canada. And so, Toronto had evolved a lot. It had become a lot like Silicon Valley, and now it's actually the same size as Silicon Valley from the standpoint of the number of tech people who work here, the number of companies. And so that's my background. I'm sort of this. I came back to Canada. I was twice a public company CEO. I know how to raise money. I've made hundreds of millions for my shareholders in the process of doing it, and I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, both as a junior kid, but also as on my own with my own companies and for other companies. So those worlds, politics, raising capital, starting companies, came together in the late 2010s when I was the CEO of a company here in Toronto, and I saw the government making poor decisions with respect to that industry. Okay, and the industry collapsed, and the number of shareholders that lost money was 100%. And most of those people who lost money were pretty frustrated with it, including me. And this made me ask the question, how was that decision made? And when I finally dug into how that decision was made, I became really angry because I discovered that all government policy is now dictated by a handful of algorithms that are owned by FANG companies, if you think about Facebook and all these guys. Rather than what's good for the country or what's good for the party or what's good for a given constituency in Canada. Okay. And this doesn't apply just to Canada. This isn't a Canadian problem. It's a world problem. The United States is the same. Look what's happening down there. That has nothing to do with the reality on the ground. It has everything to do with 6 algorithms messing with people's heads, which means our decision processes are broken in this world and they need to be changed. And that's exactly what Humanity GPT is designed to do. It's designed to go head to head with those algorithms for societal good and to offset the societal bad that those things are doing today, best exemplified by the destruction of an industry, $130 billion loss in a government policy. And it was all, I say no evil, I hear no evil, I see no evil. Like, that's not how I want our countries run. So I did this and put all my money into it.
Okay, this is unbelievable. So we gotta delve into this. So what industry, what $130 billion industry went to zero?
So it's the cannabis industry. So, marijuana cigarettes.
Okay.
So in Canada, they decided to legalize. It was all but legalized anyway from the 2000s, like the Netherlands or like the States. California and Washington State, where I lived, it was all marijuana all the time everywhere. So, but then legalization first took place in Canada. And that was about, you'll remember Harper started it in about 2012, medical. And then they went to the next step, which was recreational cannabis. And in that 4 or 5 year period of time, the accretion of capital into our public markets and into our exempt markets, for those that aren't specialists in this, it's publicly traded companies and private companies that are raising money is the exempt market. But it's still prospectus exemptions that we're talking about here. Those companies, there were 186 private companies that were publicly traded, and then there were dozens more, dozens of times more in the private sector. Miller Thomson did a study and looked at all that accretive capital that had come into Canada. I mean, we had multi-billion-dollar cannabis companies that are today penny stocks, okay? And so if you look at how the actual corporations were built, they expected the market to be a retail market for cannabis, which means you could market, you could compete, you could do whatever you wanted to do like any other market. And the government, at the very last minute, based on what social media told them to do, decided we are going to create an LCBO of sorts, which is a government-controlled monopoly for cannabis, which meant that all those companies were anathema to the future. And so what happened to the 186 publicly traded cannabis companies? And by the way, they weren't all selling marijuana cigarettes to get high. Lots of them were pharmacy companies that were going to work with, the sort of medical side of. Okay, there was this huge industry that had grown up around it. that was funded by the recreational marijuana that was going to create a whole bunch of AI companies, and all of them gone. And 5 years after that was done, so that was 2016 legalization. 5 years out, I think it was 2021, 2022, Miller Thompson, you can look it up, did a study on what that policy cost Canadians. And the policy cost was $131 billion. That was the butcher's bill when it was all said and done, okay? And we don't have a cannabis industry of any repute in this country to speak of. Okay, those companies are. Where's Tweed? Where's Aurora? Where is Canopy? I mean, these were 20 billion. You know, in the end, when a government can decide to disembowel an industry like this without good consultation, that's wrong. I don't care if they want to disembowel it. I'm less interested in that. I'm more interested in the people having given informed consent for that to happen, and that wasn't done. And do you know why I know that wasn't done?
No.
What do you think bore the brunt of that loss? This is what made me really mad, because I come from the working class. Do you think it was the rich people who had funded these things? No. All they did was liquidated their positions in these companies as fast as humanly possible. Who bought those shares?
Everybody.
The people who didn't know better, that thought cannabis can only go up. And those are my people, Brian. And those are the people I stick up for. And I'm pissed about it. Okay. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I haven't made it.
Okay. So we're going to have to talk about this Miller Thompson report and the analysis at some point in time. But let's now take to the next step. So what you're saying is that the government action decision that was taken because of algorithms, not because of smart thinking?
Yes.
Explain that.
And in fact, no, the smart thinking was there. They knew what this was going to do, but they also knew that if they didn't do the other thing, which is disembowel the industry, that they would lose politically because social media would eat them. That means, let me be clear on this point. This is so important. That means Canadians are not deciding Canadian policy. Now, I don't know about you, but whatever you want to call that, it's not a democracy.
Okay, so who's deciding? Social media algorithms are deciding? Explain.
Well, theoretically, I don't mean that the algorithm is forcing somebody to make the decision. I rather mean the opposite, okay? And that is that the social media algorithms are so predictive and so good at telling the government what works and what doesn't, that the government follows that prescriptive value. If a poll, for instance, in the old days, if a poll came out and said, do what Murray thinks is right for cannabis industry so you don't lose 131 billion or you lose the whole industry, you know that's going to happen. Now you have to choose the politics of that. Do I do it or don't I do it? Well, if I do what Murray wants, will I win? Maybe. If I don't do what Murray wants, will I win? It's that question that social media informs, because they decide whether or not a particular set of posts, okay, a marketing campaign that they put out vis-a-vis, say, the cannabis industry, is going to win or lose for them. And the messaging inside of it is so precise and so understandable because of the power of these algorithms, that those algorithms can allow me to specifically target individuals and get a bill passed. Well, today, to get a bill passed and to carry the support forward also means the policies have to be structured in such a way that they may not be in the best interest of the people. And nobody knows this, okay? I mean, unless you know how those work. All these people claim they know how social media algorithms and platforms work. They don't have a clue. Okay, all they know is the output of those platforms say, don't do it this way, do it that way. And when they did it this way, they knew the cost was going to be huge because they talked to everybody in our society before they did the policy. So they knew what they were doing.
So you're saying that this government regulation in 2016 that effectively created an LCBO-like cannabis industry was driven not by good decision-making or economic decision-making, but based on electoral success as predicted by social media.
Yes, 100%. Exactly what you just said. In fact, I think you can, if you go Google policy value, do something like, does policy drive politics or does social media? You'll find any number of scholars that have written on this subject.
Well, we're going to have to do that. That sounds like an interesting topic for conversation. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments where I got a couple of final questions to try to challenge Murray with, because this is a really interesting topic and conversation. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Murray Simser. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. My guest tonight is Murray Simser, the founder and CEO of a platform called Citizn that is trying to democratize decision-making. And you know what? This has been a mind-boggling conversation today, and I'm going to have to really delve into some of the topics that, Murray, you've raised. Let me see if I can... I was thinking it was going to challenge you, but maybe I'm actually agreeing with you. I don't know. So I've been really fussed by some of the articles recently on politics in the United States, where it's, the comments that are being made is that the Democratic Party in the United States is going crazy because Joe Biden, the current president of the United States, performed poorly in a debate 2 weeks ago and showed his age. And that therefore they're going crazy, debating whether he can be successful. And yet in the Republican Party, you've got a candidate, the former president, Donald Trump, who has so clearly made some fairly major mistakes, issues, problems, been found guilty of 34 felony cases, made some unbelievably, irrational, I would say, or at least, comments, policy positions that people would normally think were inappropriate in regards to dictatorial, authoritarian kind of decision-making, et cetera. But the Republican Party seems to just not care and not make any issue about it. And it's almost as if the Democratic Party is more worried about the reality of decision-making, and 50% of the population in the Republican Party just want to win power. And so we don't care about the decision-making. And so therefore, I guess my question is it all about decision-making and democracy, or is it all about power?
Well, it's Maslow explained it best. It's all about power. Decision-making has not to do with whether or not you have power. It has to do with whether or not you get power. Okay, so power is the goal. Maslow's simple on this point, okay? It's a hierarchy of needs, and power is 4.5. You self-actualize after power, apparently. So the idea is power is the goal. Decision-making is the process by which you get to the goal. And right now, the decision-making process, as you obviously pointed out in your explanation in the United States, is corrupted. What happens to a computer when there's corruption in data? Blue screen, okay? So it's no different in the human operating system. The simple fact of the matter is you pointed out one example of a decision process that is beyond flawed, okay? And that flaw needs to be solved. And here's the deal. If a government can ignore data that says otherwise, it means the data is not important in the decision process of politics, say. Our job as a species is to make sure that data that matters is important. And it's my job to build that. And I've built it. And now we're going live.
So you're saying we're in a blue screen position in the United States? We should just unplug and do a restart?
Of destruction from the standpoint of politics. And frankly, not just politics. I don't want to load up on politicians, okay? Politicians do what they do. We want them to behave that way. Politicians always go to what is going to create the greatest amount of harmony, broadly speaking, across the world. And believe it or not, social algorithms create harmony across the world because it ties people to their decisions. Okay? But that doesn't mean that's the right harmony. Okay? There's the People's Republic of China type harmony, and there's the Canadian style of harmony. And I think those are two very different things, two very different informed consent models. And at the end of the day, we just need to understand that the status quo does not have to be the status quo. We don't need people taking over our cities and having revolutions in DC and burning our parliaments to the ground, or churches and synagogues. We're living in a cuckoo land, and nobody understands why. And as a nerd with a propeller and everything on here who helped create a lot of this technology, I'm mortified that humans are not able to be more or less prone to the vagaries of this nonsense. And yet here we are. And so,
Murray,
we're not going to win by fighting against that tide. That tide is here. We need to go with the tide. And so I've built something that will make a better data set, more powerful than all that social media nonsense. Okay. And we'll make good decisions.
Murray, why are we living in this cuckoo world? I have interacted with, as you have probably interacted with, more conspiracy theorists, people that have got wild ideas in the last couple of years than ever before. What's going on in our world that we've got this cuckoo world?
So let's talk about conspiracy theories, because I too think that we've gone off the deep end. If you go down a rabbit hole like some kind of conspiracy, pick your conspiracy, and you go onto YouTube and then you watch the videos that it recommends after the fact, you will end up down a rabbit hole that is so far. But here's the point. A lot of the conspiracy theories that have existed aren't conspiracy theories. They're just stupid decision making by the government, and people aren't dumb. They know when governments are making stupid decisions. They can feel it instinctively. And so a lot of this conspiratorial behavior is just misplaced pissed offness against governments that are obviously lying to their citizens to match the social media zeitgeist, to win the argument. We don't always know everything about a policy, but when a government is out there doing their bullshit, okay, that stuff, you can sniff that a mile away no matter how educated you are. And right now, I would suggest to you there is not a single, and I say this, not one politician anywhere in the West that is an honest broker. And I don't mean they're dishonest. I mean they're consciously choosing the bullshit rather than what is efficacious or good for their citizens. And that's wrong, and it's going to change, and I'm the one to do it.
They're constantly making the decisions. I won't use your bull comment, but constantly making decisions based on stuff rather than what's actually the best decision.
For instance, the abortion debate. Why is abortion back in the debate after 40 years of consensus globally? Why?
Roy versus.
Do you think that's a mistake?
Roy v. Wade, and the Supreme Court did.
Exactly right. Do you think that's a mistake that that's back in the news?
Yes.
This is what's causing it. Okay.
How? I don't understand. How's this causing it?
Because this device is what manages the brains of every human being, and all those people get on board with what's here because they don't spend time thinking. They're sitting here doing reels. They're watching these little short blips. That actually programs a human being over time. And don't believe all this addiction nonsense you hear about social media. All it is if you present something to somebody enough times, their brain will change slowly towards that idea. That's what this is, okay? This is an engine that does that. It will behavior modify people. And to the degree that you allow people who are less benevolent to manage that, which social media platforms are, and I don't mean they're evil. I just mean their algorithms are specifically designed to sell ads. So what are they going to do? They're going to take the worst part of you. Ads get sold when blood, war, failure, catastrophe, all of these things are what is generally promoted here because the human condition is automatically designed to seek that. And when you seek it, you're designed to attach to it, have an emotional reaction. And that's what behavior modifies you towards more extreme positions. And so you find yourselves in a society where groups are at each other's throats now in a way that is so detrimental and destructive, it's got to be fixed, right?
And Citizn and Murray Simser will do it. Murray, fascinating conversation. This could go on for days. We're going to have you back to talk about it more. I guess, given this conversation, frankly, I want to throw out my smartphone. And maybe I will. Murray Simser, Citizen, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Interesting.
Thank you, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Saga 960 on an old AM radio. You can get me. You don't have to put me on your smartphone. You don't have to go to the podcast or the YouTube to hear me. You can go to an old AM radio that maybe Murray will like better than the smartphone. I don't know. That's the show for tonight, everybody.
It certainly caused less problems than this wonderful new social media. I'll tell you that. Brian, thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.